Then we'll start today's webinar, which is a presentation from Michel Cermak, an independent researcher who's going to talk about Loi de Robien, if little no French 4-day work week legislation. Really looking forward to hearing about this, as it's something that is new to me and I think might be new to quite a lot of people watching today. So I'm handing over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I will try to share my screen. There we go. And hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I did indeed. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So I did indeed suggest that we do a webinar on this law because I've been always surprised how little it is known already in the French-speaking bubble, but even more so outside of it. And since I think all of us here have heard extensively about recent trials and recent data on the 4-day week, I always thought, to my knowledge, this is the longest lasting or oldest experiments at this scale of a 4-day week. Or at least it's one that should be better known. So maybe first little word about myself. So my name is Michel Cermak. I have been active on the topic of working time reduction and 4-day week for more than 10 years. I co-authored the book published in 2016 with Delphine Houard on the campaign on the topic, and we ran campaigns and advocacy activities with a group called the Roosevelt Collective, initiated in France by French economist Pierre Larouturou. And then some years later, Pierre Larouturou became a member of the European Parliament, and I joined his team, and I worked there with him for 5 years. And among other things, we developed a European pilot project on 4-day week and working time reduction that has been included in the EU budget for 2023 and 24 with 2 million euros in commitment that included a number of activities, case studies, a horizon of the different legislations in Europe on working time. And I think we also played a little role, as Pierre was General Rapporteur of the EU budget, in pushing for the inclusion of a working time reduction line in the Horizon work program that some of you may be familiar with. Some parts of this presentation I will share with you today come from presentations we did together with Pierre in the Parliament at the time. And I say that because some are more about the narrative about 4-day week that we used to convey with Pierre, which is quite different with what I'm used to from this network's webinars or from 4-day week global, for instance, narrative. So yeah, I'll try to go quickly through it because it's not the main point of this presentation, but still I thought it might be relevant to also shed some light on this a bit different way of talking about 4-day week than what we are used to. So there you go. Here it is. This is the Loi Robien. This is actually the first draft of the bill one of the first drafts that was tabled in the French Parliament, Assemblée Nationale, in 1995, with a quite diverse range of members of Parliament that co-signed it and supported it with diverse political views. And here is the final version that was adopted and enacted on 11th of June 1996. So that's exactly 30 years this month. Those who can read French will probably see that the main angle at the time was to support employment. So the context at the time was a very widely shared concern about mass unemployment. I know very well that the relationship between working time reduction and job creation remains, of course, a contested terrain in labor economics, and I will come back to this extensively because this is one of the main differences between the narrative that is conveyed here as compared to what we know. So a little word on this narrative. It started with mass unemployment at the time. Started by saying that we have become, or many of us, at least in the French context, have become over the years accustomed to a quite high level of mass unemployment. But of course, it's not always been the case. And if you look here, since the 60s, particularly youth unemployment, but all ages categories of unemployment compared to the late 60s, in the 90s or today, it's 2 to 4 times higher. And so the part of the narrative was this: we have become accustomed to this, but actually this is not a fatality, and this can be addressed. As I said, and pardon me, this is a bit of a authoritative argument, but I had this discussion many times with people including from the 4-day global community, and I always refer back to the famous TED talk from Professor Juliet Schor, who said in this talk that of course it's true that doing 100% of the work in 80% of the time is not feasible everywhere. That many teachers and flight attendants need to slow down, not intensify, and of course, and this was in 2022 in the COVID context, healthcare workers, for instance, at the front line of the pandemic, need to work less, not more. And then the professor referred to the experiment in the care sector in Gothenburg with a 6-hour day that we also covered in our book, and we went there to interview some of the people who took part. And there, new staff was being hired for the hours that were not covered. Here is another case that some of you will know because it was actually from. I learned about it from a webinar of this network in February last year. It was about a nursery in Portugal that was part of the trial there, and there was 22 workers in the nursery, and switching to a 4-day week with 30 hours created the need to hire only one extra person, which is already quite low, and quite surprising to many people, but it's not zero. So it's not 100% compensation of the hours, because of course there are all the impacts that we know about productivity gains, about less absenteeism, less turnover, etc. But even in the trials that we know about, in some sectors, there is job creation that is required. And to me, the interesting question today in some sectors is to get better clarity about exactly how much that is between 0 and 100%. So back now to the narrative, we used to always insist on the fact that unemployment is not just a problem for unemployed people. It's also mass unemployment is also putting pressure on wages, because in many companies, in the context of mass unemployment, the negotiation on salaries is quite fast. If you're not happy, you can go find another job. So there is not as much room to negotiate wages upwards when we have 10% unemployment as compared to lower levels, and so this contributed to a decline of the share of salaries in GDP over the last 40 years in most advanced economies. What we used to say also when talking about this law is always that some of our governments, including in France, supposedly center-left governments, was always insisting on there cannot be job creation without economic growth, but don't worry, growth is coming back. This is something we had put together a little video at the time of French presidents who've been saying more or less with the same sentences, the same thing over and over again for the last 40 years. But actually, the reality is quite different. If you look over the long run again, GDP growth at a level that is sufficient to actually create jobs is something that has been further and further away from reality over the last 6 or 7 decades. So the question is, how can we create job without just hoping or working towards more GDP growth? And not just how can we create jobs, but also how can we maintain social protection schemes and finance them, which is one of the big obstacles. At least when we were in the European Parliament, it was quite clear that even quite left-leaning members of parliament were still very much attached to the aim of creating growth, because it's the only way to create jobs and to finance social protection. This law and these companies that use this law show a different story. So it's not just about do we want or do we not want more growth. It's how do we function in a world where growth is not at the level that it has been in years. Again, this is all a narrative that I'm really happy to have discussions about and counter arguments about. Is to launch a discussion. The other argument that you all know is, of course, the productivity gains. We produce more with less work. And so there is the productivity gains that can be gained from implementing a 4-day week that we all know very well in the 100 model. But there is also all this productivity gain growth from the last 30 to 40 years that is not been translated into collective working time reduction. So if we need less work to produce more, that's also a good reason to maybe share work more widely. So these were some images that we showed to just illustrate how the first productivity revolution was this value chain or chain work. But there were still quite a number of workers on the chain. If you compare to today's factories, it's more and more robots and less people, and that's also true, of course, for the services sector. So this productivity revolution could be a good news if we were to better share the hours of work that are available. I'm going a bit quicker now because I think we all want to get to the part where we actually understand how this law worked. So maybe the last part of this narrative was focused on reframing the debate as not should we reduce working time or should we better share working time, but is the current sharing of working time really the best we can do? And if you look at France today, for instance, the division of working time can really be considered as not optimal when millions and millions of people are working 39 hours per week with all the burnouts and epidemics and all the stress epidemics that we know about. When 4 to 5 million people are unemployed with 0 hours, and you have millions of people working part-time with also all kinds of difficulties, you could think that it's different in other countries. Of course, in Germany, there are, and in other countries, you could say there is almost full employment, but still with 6 million of mini jobs in Germany, you could also say that working time and revenues could be better shared. So the law. The debate started in France in the early 90s. This is 1992, I think, from a big, quite important CEO. This is Antoine Riboud, the CEO of Danone, that launched the debate on the 32 hours week. And again, this was mainly presented as something that would help combat mass unemployment. And then, of course, the big question was how to make it work, how to pay for it. And so the proposal that Pierre Larouturou worked on at the time with former Prime Minister Michel Rocard was to reach. They were trying to find a solution to reach two goals: to enable a 4-day week, with of course a reduction in hours, and with job creation. They wanted to ensure that there would be no decrease of salaries and no increase of the costs for the employers or of the final prices of products for the customers. And the proposal of the solution came from labor union CFDT to say, but the good news is that in many of our rich countries, we do take care of unemployment and the consequences of unemployment with quite heavy budget lines of unemployment benefits. So why not activate those spendings and put this money on the negotiation table if and only if the company commits to create good paying, decent, stable jobs. So we always insisted that it's essential to explain that those financial mechanisms can be built to show that they can be a win-win-win option to support the creation of jobs in the sectors that will need it. How did it work? The law provided a decrease in social contribution, so that's minus 8% of your employment cost or of your salary costs, if and only if 10% new jobs, permanent contracts are created. The salary is fully maintained for workers at the lower end of the salary scale, and for the rest of workers, there is a little space to negotiate on a case-by-case basis. I will come back to it in a moment with the concrete examples. It's things like you have some allowances or some seniority benefits that can be frozen for a number of years, these kind of things. So it's most of the time it's not actual cuts, but it can be some adaptation. We'll come back with an examples. Will be more concrete. So all of that makes it balanced for the company, no extra cost. People do actually get a 4-day week. Here is an example from another quite large company where 120 new jobs have been created, and you can see here that they actually decided to go for 15% job creation. They had 10% of lower social contribution in the first year, and then 8 for the next 6 years. And these are all the small things that have been negotiated to balance the whole thing. So price were not increased, and salaries were not cut. There were some benefits or that were supposed to increase over years and that have been frozen just for a couple of years. And that's the result of course the social dialogue with the workers' representatives. And then in all of the cases there had to be a vote of the workers, and there were in all those cases massive support for switching to a 4-day week. Here are some of the companies that took part. We always said that there were about 400 companies that took part in the mechanism. Exactly how many and exactly who are those 400 companies is something that still needs to be looked into. I will come back to it. But we have serious evidence that there are at least 400 of them. Here is one case study that I personally really like. It's IPREMA. It's you could, yeah, it's an SME between a bit less than 100 workers. They are doing recycling in the construction materials. The initial goal for them was to increase the equipment utilization and production hours. So by reducing working times, they were also to better utilize the equipment and the machines, to improve, of course, customer service availability and enhance employee working conditions, reducing the physically demanding workloads. So they started with a 4-day week with 35 hours as compared to 40 hours or 39 hours that was the norm back then. And then progressively, some years later, they went down to 32 hours, same pay, and they hired workers to offset the reduced hours. Um, there has been some differences by role. Some do 4 days, some do 5 days, but just once in a while, and then 3 days in other on other weeks. Um, so again, it's the cuts in social contribution that help finance the new hires. And the impact is that with the better utilization of the equipment, they were able to have 5 hours of production more per week. That's about 1 month of output extra every year. And the workforce over time, over the 7 years, nearly doubled from 42 to 80 employees. Of course, it's not just the 40 week that did that, but it was part of it. So they were able to measure higher productivity and competitiveness, better work-life balance, and more versatility in internal mobility because, yeah, they all have had to develop a wider range of skills to be able also to fill the gaps for colleagues who were not there on some days. They had, of course, they faced, of course, some challenges like the regulatory compliance, scheduling complexity, and cultural resistance. But overall, they made it work, and they are still enjoying the 4-day week today, 30 years later. I still had contact with them quite recently. They're happy to talk about it. So, as I said, there are not that many studies, not that many papers that document this legislation and those cases. Here is one of the few that is really putting some very basic rough figures on this. The Loi de Robien had different options. You could, the one I talked about until now is the most ambitious scheme of the law, but there were options to preserve jobs and some other options to create jobs. The offensive option is the one that creates jobs, and the studies mentioned 2,300 companies that concluded inside agreements in the offensive job creating part. Out of those, 13% went down to the lowest maximum of 33 hours per week. That's 222 companies. And if you add the next level of diminution of hours down to 32.5 hours per week, that's 482 companies total. Of course, 32.5 hours per week does not mean automatically that 100% of those companies did switch to a 4-day week every week for every worker. As you all know, 4-day week is a very powerful brand, you could say, a very powerful way to talk about it for people who are not aware and to easily create images in people's head. Then, of course, many of those companies did implement other variations around that scheme. That's why we always, when we had more than a minute to talk about it, we always talked about la semaine de 4 jours à la carte, the 4-day week à la carte, which means you can have all kinds of other variations with the same number of hours. Just a small word to say that the Loi de Robien was not the first of its kind in France. Before that, there was another mechanism that also had some social contribution reductions, but only for 3 years. And some large companies had already used that to switch to the 4-day week. For instance, Brioche Pasquier, which is a quite large French company, just to mention it. That there's not only those 400 companies, there's a bit more. How many workers did benefit? This is another paper that also does not give that much more clarity, but it still informs us that around 300,000 workers benefited from the Loi Robien. Out of those, 16,800 benefited from the most ambitious version of 33 hours per day. Apart from that, what we usually hear then from trials that we know about is the impact on well-being, on stress, on companies' revenues, etc. We don't have that here, to my knowledge. This has not been studied. There is more information to be found on those. The extensive text of those 3,000 agreements signed by 3,000 companies based on this law seem to be still available somewhere in the Ministry of Social Affairs in France. I tried to access them. I did not get an approval to get there because you need to be a formal researcher in an academic context, which I am not at the time. So I already tried with some friends and colleagues from this network. But if others want to join us in taking this further, that would be extremely welcome, because I think, again, this is the longest lasting 40-week trial that I know about. It would be nice to be able to study it more in depth. Pierre Larotureau used to always quote this figure that apparently internal documents from the Ministry of Labor at the time did come up with an extrapolation of the job creation that was made possible with these 400 pioneers, that led to believe that a generalized 4-day week in France could create 1.6 million jobs. I just shared this figure with you. I don't have the data to substantiate it, but maybe if we look for it, we can find it. And then, yes, among the open questions in my mind, one of them, of course, is in those sectors, in those companies, in those maybe public servants organizations where creating jobs will be required for a 4-day week that works for everyone. What is the level of job creation that is actually needed with the net combined effect that of all those variables that we know, efficiency gains, lower turnover, fewer 6 days, etc. How much can we bring it down? But still, how much hiring extra workers will be needed? That's something that I think would require more research. But then I'm sure that there is some already that I'm not aware of. Last thing on the law itself. From a political point of view, it's interesting to note that this has been adopted in a context where, as I said, mass unemployment was on everybody's mind, including policymakers from left and right. A group of heavily dedicated citizens were able to shift the mindset. For some reason, this slide doesn't work, but I have a graph of the general public's opinion on the 4-day week and its ability to create jobs, which actually shifted in a period of 2 years in France prior to the adoption of the law. And so those dedicated citizens were able to convince policymakers to adopt this law. Policymakers who were at the time very unpopular, pushing a very unpopular pension reform that was blocked by the resistance of the street and of the unions. And it's that same government that did adopt this law. This is the end of the law. It's signed by President Jacques Chirac, Prime Minister Alain Juppé, who, for those who know the French context, are considered or today really heavily right wing, and who probably today would not support something like that. But it's just to say that it's also interesting to know that even in this context at the time, it has been possible, and that this law has been suppressed by the center-left government that came afterwards, because they implemented the 32-hour legislation that was much more vertical, where there was still an element of social contribution decrease, but no condition of job creation. And it was implemented on the whole of the economy in such a vertical way, with so many loopholes, that today the average working time of full-time workers in France is 39 hours, not 35 as prescribed in the law. So yeah, maybe I can skip through all of this and open the floor for questions or remarks.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation, super interesting. Immediately just, yeah. If you need a name for the applications of the documents, you're welcome to use mine. I can't read any of the documents, but you're welcome to use it. Want to open up the floor to questions. So you can either just, raise your hands, write them in the chat, or, feel free to interrupt me. It's what stood out to me was that for me, I see some overlap between some of the sort of, the old-fashioned thinking between work time reduction in terms of sort of what we saw happening in lots of countries during COVID, and this French law. And I think maybe our sort of German colleagues are going to feel quite some overlaps there as well. Margareta.
Yeah, hi everybody. Really very interesting conference. And what I want to know is how many of these 400 enterprises that implemented the 32 hours week still work in 32 hours? And what are the experiences known about it?
Thank you very much for your feedback and your question. This is the question that we always ask ourselves as well. As I said, out of those 400, so Pierre Larouturou used to mention this figure of 400 companies a lot. I was happy to finally, in recent years, put my hand on some of the papers that substantiate this figure. So we know that it's around 400, that's for sure. But who are they? So far, I've been able to list maximum 30, 40. So there's a lot that certainly should be done to identify them, to trace them back, etc. From those who we know about, from those 30, 40, I've been able to confirm for sure only 2 that are still at 32 hours. Many of the others never answered to us, or the other very different thing between back then and today is that for the big company today in the trials, many of them, from what I can see, seem to see the 4-day week as something that they want to communicate about, that they are proud of, that it's perceived as have something that is quite modern and innovative for some companies as well, at least. It was not the case back then. Many companies did it without communicating anything about it, like Maminova or Fleury Michon. There are big companies producing for large distribution uh, uh, supermarkets, and yeah, they didn't want the clients to know about it because it was still seen as something. Well, if you can do these generous social things, then you could also lower your price that we pay to you. So just all that to say that many companies really kept it quite secret, and don't want to say anything about it. So yeah, the short answer is we don't really know. Not that many. From those that we were in touch, some of those that we interviewed for our book, for instance, we interviewed the old boss of an SME that was really happy about having put in place the 4-day week in his company, and then he retired, and some new people came in and bought the company, and so he told me like today there are still like 2 or 3 workers from the time who kept fighting to keep their 4-day week in 32 hours, but the new hires were at 5 days. So
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. We have 2 questions here from Lande. I'll read them out, and if there's anything you want to add, you're welcome to. So, the reduction in social security contribution, is it continuous, or is it a one-off event? And then a question on if the successive governments, especially the right-wing ones, was trying to scrap the law, wondering if it's already been scrapped. Coming in with a third question here. What happens if a company introduces the 4-day week under the mechanism of the law, profits from the reduction in social security contribution, and after like 5 years lays off the extra hired workers?
So thank you, and thank you, Lander. As you probably know, Lander, we did have a similar legislation in Belgium, which was much less generous because it covered like 20% of the job creation, whereas here in France it was more like 80 to 90%. And I guess the question is also related to the fact that the Belgian law we had was scrapped just this year. But as I said, the French law was scrapped already in 1999, I think, or 2000, because it was replaced by the 35 hours generalized legislation. And the reduction in social security contributions, in the first draft of the law, it was permanent. And then in the one that was finally adopted, it was for 7 years. So it's still quite generous. And from the testimonies that we got, 7 years was enough for most companies to then even things out with productivity gains, with, as I said, the long-term freeze on some of the benefits. Like, yeah, for the higher wages, there may be a loss over 10 years, a small loss, but from what we heard in the case that we know about, people were happy to lose that for some extra free time. And what happens if they fire the workers? That's a good question. Frankly, I don't know. We could have a look at the text of the legislation. I would think that they would have put something in there to prevent that, or to maybe make you repay some of the benefits of the reduction that you obtain. I don't know.
Thank you so much. Ludwig, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much for this overview. My question would be if you could talk about a bit more about the watering down of the reform, because the studies that I know they treat the reform as one coherent reform while it was immediately being watered down even half a year after introduction. And that makes it really hard to compare the effects between the studies.
Hmm. Um, in this particular case, I am not aware of any watering down, but it's also, I mean, it was in effect for about 2 years, huh? It was really short. That's also why it's so little known. It's they fought for it for. I mean, there's been watering down between the first draft of the bill and the one that was adopted, but I mean, in the time frame that it was actually in place, to my knowledge, it has not been changed or watered down.
As far as I remember, there was at least one reform, if not even two. The first one being half a year after introduction.
You mean for the 35 hour?
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, that's different. Again, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Most people know about the 35 hour and then the successive reforms of the 35 hours. What I'm talking about comes before, 2 years before. So that's yeah. And then again, some of the studies I shared here, they do mix up the different those different legislation and they compare them, but it's really hard to compare. I mean, the first one did only become reality for 3,000 companies, and the other ones were meant to be generalized for the whole economy. So yeah, there are all kind of differences at play.
Thank you very much. What would you this might be a bit of an obvious question, but what would you say is the sort of key learning point from your presentation? How would you, if there's anything we can learn in the current four-day work week campaign, is there anything that you feel has been missed in the way we talk? Because you said, especially before we even started today's presentation, you talked about how the context of this law is slightly different to how we're framing the campaign today. Is there anything that you think is missing or anything that you think that we should learn from this take going forward?
I think, and I mean, I had this discussion with Pedro Gomes because I know also from his book there's a whole chapter about job creation, and that's something that most economists will tell you is quite considered as not really a serious way to look at working time reduction. And I mean, the first time I told him about this law was like, yeah, but it was compulsory in this law. I mean, it's not like, I mean, it's not like the 35 hours where there has been all kinds of studies trying to analyze has there been job creation, but is it really due to the law? Is it really due to the working time reduction, or is it due to something else? Here, well, you could also say that those companies would have created those jobs without the law. There is one study that shows that it's not the case. But so I think, I mean, to answer your question, the general, I think we've been too careful and too afraid to talk about the job creation aspect. Of course, when you're trying to convince everyone, it's really difficult to convince everyone that in most companies you could actually do the same amount of work and the same production in 4 days as in 5 and in 32 hours as in 35 or 38. It's difficult to then say, then maybe in some sectors it's not the case. On the other hand, I find that some of our narrative is just impossible to hear for nurses, for teachers, from those workers will tell you, I mean, look at my face. You think I can do more in less time? So then, of course, productivity is not individual; it's collective. So even there, I mean, I'm personally trying to push now for direct trial in hospitals, in daycare, in family assistance, and these kind of things, where the main purpose is to actually measure how much job creation will be required, if any. I don't know. But I think that would be really important. And I had discussions with 4-Day Week UK, 4-Day Week Ireland, France, and others, where I think it's useful, as Juliet Schor did it in her TED Talk, to always include that in the narrative, that yes, for some workers, for some sectors, there will be job creation needed, and it doesn't make it unpayable. There are also ways to address that. And so for me would be a big step forward, and if we could all include these bits in our narrative. But I'm happy to have other feedbacks, and if people think it's not the way to go. But I think if we don't do it, there are parts of the population and of the workforce that will never hear us.
I think it's also an important part thinking about the sort of counter argument that you meet again and again. I think that addresses one of those quite nicely. I think India was first.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, really interesting presentation and case study. Sort of interested in if this was talked about, or you talked about it with Pierre when you're in the European Parliament, and kind of what responses might be from different like national representatives or public servants, kind of responses to the law and kind of the narrative around it.
We did, of course, talk about it extensively in the Parliament, but also not. I mean, yeah, the main episodes I have in mind was really like a member of the Parliament from Portugal, from the Social Democrats, telling us, working time reduction, okay, but no, I mean, we do need growth to pay for social protection. We do need growth to create jobs. I mean, we are the ones protecting workers, and if we just let go and accept that there will be no growth anymore, then we are betraying workers. So I mean, so then again, this whole thing about, to my knowledge, is one of the, I mean, apart from just investing in public services, is one of the few parts in the private economy, the few solutions in the private economy to create jobs massively, is to just better share the working hours that are there. And also, again, I looked at more closely in the Belgian context. If you look at the figures of part-time workers in the last, what was it? In the last 30 years, basically in Belgium, 30 years ago, there were like 3 to 4 million people working full time and 200,000 part time. And today it's still about the same amount full time and then 1.2 million part time. So I mean, that's also a way to show that working time reduction is happening, but on a personal at a personal level with a decrease in salary. And there again, the very poor way that working time and revenues are shared in the society, and of course it's mainly women, is also obvious, and it should be better shared. Even the I don't know if you saw this session at Davos on working time reduction, where the Minister of Labor of the Netherlands actually acknowledges that we have many people working part-time, mainly women, like 3 days a week, and many men at 5 days. So everyone at 4 days would be more fair. And she, of course she's from a right-wing government, and then of course she said, well, but then you would have to pay people less. So it was not perfect, but still, I think
something. Thank you. We're gonna take one final question from Ludwig.
Since the topic of the employment effects came up again, together with Pirin Damara at the end of last year, we just released a meta regression analysis on the employment effects of working time reductions, covering around 30 countries, 100 years of data, the only ones that were actually comparable, and around 1,200 estimates, and we find no employment effects trying to control for everything we can. Another finding that we had, however, was that most reforms done in this period did not have job creation as their primary goal. And this should also tell us a lot. And maybe this also gives us some ideas on what kind of strategies might work and which not. We also try to control for sectors, and there seems to be some hints that it might be different across sectors, but still not that much. Beyond that, I feel the problem with focusing on the job creation aspect is, as you already mentioned, that the effects might be distributed very unequally. And I expect these job creation effects to be stronger in in offices rather than in construction, nurses, healthcare, and so on. It's easier to condense working time in an office, I would argue.
Sure.
And that is a luxury that many working people in the rest of the economy don't have. So how do we get these people on board to support these kind of policies? That's, to me, the challenge.
Thank you. Yeah, Michel, that's a big question. If you can solve that, I think you can solve a lot of the challenges that we're
No,
facing.
I'm not 100% sure I got it right, but from what I understood, I mean, to my knowledge, there's not been many experiments with legislation like this one, where job creation is a condition to access the mechanism. So it makes quite a big difference. Also, I should stress, I haven't stressed it, but it's really important to me to underline it, that you could say social contribution decrease will also be bad for social security schemes and will cost too much social security schemes. But then at the same time, you create jobs, so you have more workers contributing to those social contributions schemes. So it's also balanced there. And it's just I think many of us dream of a future with the 4-day week, where the 4-day week is a reality everywhere. And in this context of austerity and of there's not €1 more to be spent on social security, on healthcare, on whatever. I've been invited to by a labor union to talk with representatives of the healthcare sector, and I mean basically anyone who tells you that the healthcare sector can just go forward as it is today and not just collapse within 10 years could be considered quite optimistic. So imagining a mechanism that could help support healthcare worker work less, hire new colleagues, because I didn't mention it that much, but today for 1 year now, I work with social partners on job shortages in the healthcare sector and in the wider care and cure sector, non-profit here in Belgium. And there I hope to conduct a 4-day week trial for those workers who need it maybe most. And there, if you do not guarantee that you will hire extra workers to carry out the hours that will not be reduced, I don't really see another way, frankly. But I mean, I hope I get there and I can come back to you. But I hope also it also touches on there was a paper from Pedro Gomes and a number of others, maybe some of them are here, on a trial of a 4-day week in the NHS in the UK. And I think they also touch on this question there. And I mean, in those sectors, I don't really see any other way than creating extra jobs. So we need to try it. And I hope it's not just the UK and Belgium that will push forward for this.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to that future study coming in. We are at 12:58. We had a lovely presentation, a lovely discussion. I want to thank you again, Michelle, for the amazing presentation, for all the participants for asking questions, engaging. We have another webinar coming up on the 29th of July, called Free Time Isn't Free, The Class Politics of Work Time Reduction. We're gonna have Emma River Roberts from the Working Class Climate Alliance, who's gonna talk about the hidden labor of free time and the class politics of work time reduction. So tangential to what we talked about today, but definitely an interesting discussion to take forward. Hoping to see you again then. And as I said, thank you very much for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, everyone.